Welcome to EoZTV. Today my guest is Jonathan S. Tobin, who has a resume that's quite large. He's the editor-in-chief of JNS, but he writes all over the place, and before that he's been like an editor all over the place. Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you for having me on.
There's a lot of stuff always going on, of course. I was just joking with him beforehand that every time I read anything that he writes, it's something that I 100% agree with, so I was worried that we had anything to talk about. But there's always new things, so this should be fun. The first thing I wanted to get into, if I could, if it's okay with you, is to talk about the news from tonight, which was that Mahmoud Abbas has declared an end to his agreements with Israel. I have on the screen right now from Wafa, the official PA news agency. They translated the entire announcement into English, which I thought it was hilarious. But I'd like to hear what you think about this.
Well, I think it is absurd. He has done this literally dozens of times, as Joe Biden would say, literally. But actually, literally, dozens of times. Every time anything doesn't happen, he says he's going to tear up the agreements with Israel. But of course, he isn't going to do that for two reasons. Number one, the Palestinian Authority depends on Israel. The Palestinian Authority is not going to give away power. Its power to dominate Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, to run things, its patronage. It runs on that. And above all, it will not abandon security coordination with Israel, which is not a carrot that Israel, that is given by the Palestinians. It is actually a carrot that is given by Israel to the Palestinians, because without security cooperation with the Israeli security services, Mahmoud Abbas doesn't last. He's dead. They protect him from Hamas and Islamic Jihad, Iran. So it's a joke. I mean, it's an empty ceremony. It's only worth commenting upon because it is a clear indication of how utterly, number one, powerless the Palestinians are, but also how isolated the Palestinians are. The Arab world no longer cares what they do. They're sick of their intransigence. They could have had, if they wanted an independent state, they could have had one 20 years ago. They could still have one. They could agree to the Trump parameters. Even though it's less generous than previous ones, but it still gives them a state if they wanted one. But they don't want one because they cannot. No Palestinian leader, least of all as weak and as feckless a man as Mahmoud Abbas, can do it because he cannot recognize the legitimacy of a Jewish state no matter where its borders are drawn. Because doing so would be seen as a betrayal by both the refugee population and Palestinians in general. I mean, their political culture is still rooted and intrinsically tied up with this 100-year-old war on Zionism. Giving it up is not just, reconciliation and much needed. It would be a recognition that their whole identity, which is bound up with this war, is has nothing. What do they go to from there? And he has no alternative. Obviously, it would be much more productive if they did, but they go through this empty exercise as a substitute for actually trying to, give their people good governance or to, negotiate to do anything to improve them. They like the status quo. I mean, Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu, is often accused of fostering the status quo, but indeed it is Abbas who benefits from the status quo more than anything.
For sure, and I think beyond that, I mean, the agreements with Israel is what gives it all revenue that it has right now, all the tax revenues. So if money is what makes the world go round. Without that, he certainly can't do anything. And in general, and this goes for Hamas as well, is that he does have control over territory right now. He has, whatever you call it, he has control over land and over people. And that's not something that certainly not a dictator like him just gives up, easily. It's what I found funny about the announcement. If you look at he has 8 different steps, and he says, we get rid of all the agreements and understandings. To me, that was funny because the entire existence of the Palestinian Authority is an understanding. That was through Oslo. So that would mean that he's sort of dissolving his own thing, which sounds a little bit weird because later on he says, we're going to complete signing agreements for the state of Palestine to accede to international agreements and conventions that we've not yet joined. So okay, let's just sign to everything. This I also found. I don't know if you read this that I had. Is really it is so cynical because I was following, and if you know about this, let me know. But I was following the Palestinians had signed to for the Declaration for Equality of Women, that convention, and without any reservations they did. However, Palestinian law has explicit laws against women, and they admitted themselves, because there was a little bit of a kerfuffle, I think late last year, in which some of the more religious parties were saying, hey, we really shouldn't. This violates Sharia law. We shouldn't do it. And in the end, they pretty much decided, well, yeah, because the way our court system works, we can't really do it. And they admitted that the entire reason they signed it was in order just to be able to say, hey, we're like a state, and therefore it would help them with the International Criminal Court.
Yeah, the whole focus of the Palestinian Authority is based on sort of illusions. It's a game with mirrors. They are a pretend state. They're a faux state, which could actually become a real state if they were ever to be willing to make peace with Israel, but they can't do that. So they're always on this, on the razor's edge between trying to act like a normal, an actor on the international stage and demanding the respect that one would, that somebody, any entity in that position would have. On the other hand, they're incapable of doing so because they can't make peace. They don't govern their territory in any meaning. They don't govern Gaza, which is run by Hamas. It is also, they are opposed to economic development. They operate more like a mafia, or corrupt, even more corrupt version of old, 19th century Tammany Hall in New York. It's a totally dysfunctional operation, all based on this illusion of statehood that it sort of contradicts itself. It aspires to statehood, but cannot accept statehood, because doing so would force it to make peace, and to make peace would mean to end the war with Israel, which would mean to undermine the entire rationale of Palestinian nationalism, which is this this refusal to accept the legitimacy of the Jewish presence. So. So of course he's always issuing these, these fake press releases that are self-contradictory and absurd, because that's all that he can do. That's all any Palestinian, the Palestinian Authority is set up to do. The political culture that is its engine just doesn't let him do anything else, even if he were interested in doing something else.
And that's for sure. And also earlier today, I actually had two different posts I had. One was talking about Saeb Erekat, who's going to be speaking at Peace Now at a conference call later this week, in which he was, I guess, Abbas might have stolen his thunder because he was going to give his usual threats of saying, oh, we're going to dissolve ourselves and I'll resign, and the world is going to, there will be thunder and lightning, and the Arab world is going to go crazy. And I pointed out he said the exact same things in previous times. There was, and then there was another article that was only peripheral to that, but I wrote about, I noticed that on Nakba Day that the PLO put out a thing saying there were 957,000 refugees in 1948. So I looked up where they got the number from, and it's essentially made up. It was from a UN report that even the UN admitted wasn't accurate. But I came up with the term because since they're so built on lies. The entire Palestinian Authority is just based on lies. So I called it a mythocracy.
I think that's an apt term. And you're mentioning that Erekat goes to Peace Now. The Jewish left and the Palestinian Authority have kind of this symbiotic relationship where each side is pretending. The Jewish left pretends that the Palestinian Authority is a peace partner. The Palestinian Authority pretends to be a state aspiring to peace. But it's not. It's all an illusion. It's a sham. And so even if you are for a two-state solution, even if you're going to argue it's the most rational way to end the conflict, it can't end. I mean, the reason why there is an almost supermajority in the Knesset for extending Israeli law to the Jewish settlements, and why frankly the peace process, the Palestinians, the conflict was not an issue in any of the 3 elections that Israel held in the last year, was that there's a consensus within Israel on the conflict, because pretty much everybody, except on the very far left, understands there's no peace partner. The Palestinians are incapable of making peace. It's not that they just won't or they haven't. They're incapable of it because that is the essence of their political culture doesn't let them. And so it's just time to move on. And the Palestinian Authority and Abbas is about trying to distract us from that, and the Jewish left tries to assist them, but it's certainly within Israel that's a complete lost cause. I mean, they're completely marginalized, but that's the contrast between Israeli Jews and American Jews. Israeli Jews, wherever they started out, whether they were once ardent supporters of Oslo or not, understand the peace process and the two-state solution is a dead letter. They just have to manage the conflict as best they can now, whereas American Jews act like the last 27 years of history didn't happen. It's just down the Orwellian memory hole.
Yeah, that always has bothered me, because I always felt that the Israeli left, or whatever's left of it, center left, whatever you want to call it, who do understand this stuff, and a couple people do, like Einat Wilf or something like that, but it's like they don't seem to be making the case to the American left. The American left pretends that we have Haaretz, we have that there's huge numbers of Israelis on their side, and it's not true at all.
I think for a long time, discussions about Israel and Israeli politics were predicated on the idea that Israel was split down the middle between left and right. And for a long while that was true, but it actually hasn't been true for almost 20 years. The Second Intifada, which followed Ehud Barak's attempt to make peace, to offer the Palestinians, Arafat, an independent Palestinian state in almost all of the West Bank, a share of Jerusalem and Gaza. Arafat said no, answered with a terrorist war of attrition, which both literally and figuratively blew up Israeli hopes for peace, Israeli illusions about Palestinians wanting peace. And ever since then, there's really been a consensus on the other side. Now, and again, Ehud Olmert tried to revive it by, again, offering an even sweeter deal to the Palestinians, and Abbas said no, he walked away from it. Just as, during the 8 years of the Obama administration, which was determined to tilt the diplomatic playing field in the Palestinians' direction, the Palestinians, took no advantage of it. Obama did everything he could to assist them in against Israel, and they gave him nothing. They wouldn't even meet him halfway. So there is this basic contradiction. American Jews act as if, Oslo is still viable, two states are still viable, the Palestinians want peace. The overwhelming majority of Israelis, including many, no matter what, the issue in the Israeli elections was, more Bibi or not, or enough of Bibi. Has nothing to do with the peace process. They're pretty united on the peace process. That's why Benny Gantz, basically tried his best to run to the right of Netanyahu, saying he was for annexing, the Jordan River Valley, and saying he would never give up settlements. So again, there's the discussion about these issues within American Jewish forums tends to be really distorted. Because so many people here in the United States are still buying into premises that just disappear, that they no longer are viable. It's not even, it's a question of whether they're wrong, they're just obsolete, out of date. And that makes for a very empty discussion.
Sure. Do you think that that Israel is going to extend its sovereignty over areas this, before November, because it looks like that's, that seems to be the deadline. They want to, they're worried that Biden might win. So do you actually think it's going to happen? Because it does look like there's pressure coming in from Europe and from Jordan, and I don't see that they have a choice, because this is the only opportunity they're ever going to have. But I was wondering what you think.
Well, there are a number of factors. It's a very complex question. It's not a simple yes or no. I think, sort of all the players, the Trump administration is encouraging it, and in fact put forward a peace plan predicated on it. On the other hand, they're sending some mixed signals right now too. It's hard to see where they're going to go. They want it to be in conjunction with peace talks with the Palestinians. Well, that's not going to happen because there are no peace talks. They want to preserve the viability of their plan, but their plan never was viable. The Palestinians rejected it out of hand. And also, here's the real nut of the problem, or the interesting part here, in that Netanyahu has always liked to talk about doing something like this. He never wanted to actually do it. Mm-hmm. He has always preferred to keep the status of the territories and of the settlements ambiguous. In that sense, he was kind of there's no big difference between him and some on the moderate left. I'm not saying that he's a leftist, but, that it didn't serve, he never thought that it served Israel's interest to sort of declare, extend sovereignty into the settlements, because, it's like this current situation, the status quo works for Israel. I mean, it's a technicality. The Jews who live in those settlements still live under Israeli law. They have full civil rights as Israeli citizens. Yes, it's technically under the control of the army rather than the civil authority, but it's more of a symbolic move. And he's never thought. I mean, he talks about it during elections to appeal to his followers, but he's always slapped down procedurally any attempt to move forward on this issue in the past and during all of his years as prime minister. He's veering closer to it now. It may well happen, but there are reasons why it might not happen, or he might settle for something symbolic, even though the whole thing is basically symbolism. I mean, the deal about annexation, which is sort of a false term, because Israel's not taking something that belongs to somebody else, because the territories never belonged to anybody else. Right. Britain, Turkey, the Palestinians were not a sovereign. Jordan had no rights there. But it's kind of overrated. Both its opponents claim it forestalls a two-state solution. That's actually not true. I mean, Israel could extend its law into every settlement, and the Palestinians could still have a state outside of that area, which is most of the West Bank, if they wanted to, at least as or at least they start negotiating on it. But again, they don't do that because to enter into such negotiations is to contemplate the end of the conflict, which in the end, they think Tel Aviv is an illegal settlement too. So it's very hard for them to do that. So a lot of this discussion, is sort of based on, accepting sort of false premises. Now, what is interesting and what may be motivating this? Yes, this is the most pro-Israel administration Israel has ever had to work with. There's no doubt about it. And if it goes away next January, and Joe Biden is elected president, and we have sort of Obama's third term, they understand a lot of things will be different, and there are things that they can accomplish with Trump that they can, and probably they've accomplished more with him in terms of Jerusalem and the Golan and holding the Palestinians accountable than they've ever dreamed that they could. That will be out the window. Do they need to do this thing on the settlements before then? If you think it's a priority, if you think it really is a symbolic issue that needs to be done, then yes. But here's the thing: they don't want to be too loud. Certainly, and this applies to Ambassador Ron Dermer, who's lobbying Washington really hard to allow this. you don't want to send Trump the signal. If you're Israel, you don't want, and Netanyahu, you don't want to send Trump the signal that you think he's going to lose.
Yeah.
That's just that's just basically personal dynamics. With Trump, everything is personal dynamics. That's not something you want to do. You have to be very careful about that. And the more that angle is hyped, the less Trump is going to like it.
Yeah.
On the other hand, it is not in Trump's interest to have a rift with Israel under any circumstances in these next 6 months while he's running for re-election, because not that it's going to win him Jewish votes. The Jewish vote is going to be what it's going to be. I mean, Biden's going to get 60 to 70% of the Jewish vote, no matter what he does. If he never comes out of the basement, that's not going to change. What is in play is whether Trump can keep his base, which is very partly evangelical Christians who are ardent supporters of Israel and who frankly are ardent supporters of extending Jewish sovereignty over all of the land of Israel. So he's not going to want to make them think, well, he's not that good, or that he's not strong on that issue on which he's been historically strong during his 3.5 years in office. So it could happen, but it's starting an argument, with Europe, with the world, with the Arabs. Now, in truth, the Arab world doesn't really care about what goes on in the whose law is running, Jewish settlements in 20 to 30% of the West Bank. I mean, that is not something they care about. They don't care about the Palestinians at all. But the one concern that is real is, can King Abdullah keep his throne in Jordan? Will something happen that will rile up the Palestinian masses in Jordan and lead to his overthrow, or at least make his regime shaky? And that's something that neither Jerusalem nor Washington wants. Jordan is this very delicate thing. I mean, it is in Israel's interest and in the United States' interest to keep, a authoritarian, undemocratic leader on the throne of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. And they're willing to give him a pass on a lot of stuff, a lot of nasty rhetoric about Jerusalem, a lot of, chest thumping on a lot of other issues, even on, what is, I guess, certainly for the government's a tangential issue, like extraditing the, one of the Sbarro pizza, murderers from 2000. Which is a terrible, terrible story, and parents of one of the children who were killed in that horrible crime have are suing and are attempting to pressure the United States to force Jordan to extradite Ahmed Tamimi, who was the organizer of that atrocity, who is living freely in Jordan. She's living freely in Jordan because she was part of a prisoner release to free, an Israeli prisoner who was being held by Hamas in 2011. She's there because Netanyahu made the decision to let her be there. There's a lot of agitation within the Jewish community. It's all very well-meaning, and I support it in principle. Of course, she should be brought to justice. She should be given the justice under American law that she deserves. And the idea of her sitting there freely in Jordan, spouting her hate is intolerable. A child murderer, a mass murderer.
I had Arnold Roth on the show.
Yeah, but that extradition isn't going to happen. And everybody in Amman, Jerusalem, and Washington knows it's not going to happen, because to do so, to force King Abdullah to extradite her, would, possibly destabilize his regime. And, if he wouldn't say so publicly, but Benjamin Netanyahu thinks that's a more important, factor than justice for, the murder of Malki Roth. That's a sad thing to say, and people were very angry at me when I wrote that the other day, or last week. I noticed somebody on Twitter was saying he wasn't going to watch this program because he's still so mad at me for saying that, but, it's the truth. I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm saying it's actually a bad thing, but it's also the truth.
I had Arnold Roth on as well.
Just what they want to hear.
Yeah, sure. No, as I said, I had Arnold Roth on a few days ago as well, and it is a tragic story. But I can't imagine. I would love to see the pressure, and I think we should have a lot more pressure. As far as what's going to happen with Bibi, I think, I mean, I know that he's been wanting the status quo, but personally, I think that he's very sensitive to the demographic argument. Personally, I think that he's a little worried about long term, about the having the larger Arab population than a Jewish population between the river and the sea, and I think that this is the opportunity in order to forestall that argument.
Well, sure, but nobody outside of Israel or the Trump administration is going to accept that anyway. I mean, as far as the rest of the world is concerned, Gaza is still occupied, even though it's an independent Palestinian state in all but name. Israel has to do what it's in its interest, and certainly anyone who has any feeling for Jewish rights to the land of Israel, which should be defended and should be asserted. I mean, that's an argument in of itself that Israel should claim parts of its homeland, and even while leaving open the possibility of peace with the Palestinians. If that doesn't resonate with you, then this is all kind of like a very arid question. But is he going? In the end, will it happen? The one thing I know about Netanyahu is that he's all about staying in power. And if he thinks this will help him stay in power, then it will happen. If he thinks it will undermine him with the United States, then he'll find a way not to do it, or just to do it in, say, declare victory, say, apply it to Gush Etzion, or something like that, rather than the rest of the settlements and the territories. I think to me, it's 50-50 whether it winds up happening.
Well, again, a lot of this, and then you touched on this for a second, a lot of this is also going to be keyed on what happens in November. And there has been, it looks like Biden over the past day has started to go on a charm offensive against, for the Jews of America. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, well, we should, those of us who care about Israel should always be happy when candidates go on charm offensives. Whether we want to believe them or not is an interesting question. But that's the essence of democracy, is accountability. He's trying to secure Jewish votes or pro-Israel votes. So that's always a good thing, whether we want to believe it or not. I'll start out by saying that. The thing about a Biden administration is that it will be basically Obama's third term. The other day, his chief foreign policy advisor, Tony Blinken, who was a Clinton and Obama administration staffer, was arguing, saying that Joe Biden is an ardent friend of Israel, and that unlike clearly trying to draw some distinction between a Biden administration and an Obama administration, was that he would have his arguments with Israel privately rather than publicly. Now, of course, that would be good if that were true. Much better to hope keep things. That this would be a rejection of Barack Obama's belief that there needed to be more daylight between Israel and the United States. But but there's a lot of contradictions in what Blinken and what Biden are saying. On the one hand, they say they want to be strong friends with Israel, they're going to strengthen the alliance, but they're still recycling the same failed policies of basically pretending, as I say, that the last 27 years since Oslo didn't happen, having learned nothing from the events of all those years. That's really, it's a very poor argument. He says he wants, to resume aid to the Palestinian Authority, but he's going to respect the Taylor-Force Act, which prevents the United States from giving that aid so long as the Palestinians are going to continue subsidizing terror, which the Palestinian Authority does, paying pensions and salaries to terrorists based on how many people they kill. So there's a contradiction there. On the one hand, he wants to strengthen Israel in the region, but he says he's going to re-enter the Iran nuclear deal, which was a disaster for Israel and the West in general. But he wants to make the Iran nuclear deal better. Well, you can't make the Iran nuclear deal better if you re-enter the nuclear deal, if you re-enter the agreement and end sanctions. Without sanctions, the sanctions that Trump has tightened, really pushing Iran hard, you have no leverage to improve it. You're just kicking the can down the road, because the nuclear deal ensures that sooner or later Iran will have a nuclear deal. So these are a lot of circular arguments, sort of throwing a lot of eyewash at pro-Israel voters. But the truth is, about this, a Biden administration will be, maybe the atmospherics will be slightly different, but it will, but let's remember, Joe Biden has gotten into plenty of arguments with Israel. He's been lecturing Israeli leaders dating back to Menachem Begin, who basically, lectured Biden famously with his speech about, I am not a Jew with trembling knees. Don't talk to me, little man. And to pretend that there would not be tension between Biden and any Israeli government, whether it's led by Netanyahu or Gantz or anybody else, is to be blind. The truth is, it might be worse than an Obama administration, because both the Democratic Party has shifted to the left in that sense. There will be voices in his administration that are to the left of where Obama was. Indeed, if Obama entered, the Democratic primaries this year, he would have been, among the more pro-Israel candidates. Now, Biden says he won't condition aid, on Israel bowing to his demands. But, all these assurances were made by Barack Obama in 2008, and he eventually walked them back too. So I don't think there can be a lot of confidence in those promises from Biden. And certainly the contrast between, his administration and, an ardently pro-Israel Trump administration will be great.
And I believe personally, I think what you're saying is right, that it has a lot to do with the entire Democratic Party moving to the left. I see Biden as fairly indistinguishable from the positions of J Street. I mean, Obama made J Street, as far as, Obama sort of created it and gave it its...
Well, J Street was the sort of the Jewish rump of MoveOn.org, looking back, 12, 13 years ago. And it's J Street's, although J Street had ambitions of, rivaling AIPAC, becoming the main, voice for Jews on Israel, its main job was to be the Jewish cheerleaders for whatever pressure policies Obama was exerting on Israel. It was, the Jewish cheerleader for the Iran nuclear deal. And J Street, that is, so I think you're right. Biden's positions are indistinguishable from that of J Street, because, Biden was part of the Obama administration. Right. The point to make about that is that this is completely out of touch. It's not, beyond the question of whether you think they're right or they're wrong, and I think they're wrong, they're completely out of touch with the reality of the Middle East, and the reality of the Palestinians, who don't want their two-state solution. They could have had their two-state solution at any time in the last 20 years or more if they had wanted it. They're out of touch with the reality on Iran and what its ambitions and what the Iran nuclear deal did. That's the real problem here. It's not the question of what they're saying, but that these are unrealistic, basically irrelevant stands. I mean, vis-a-vis what's going on in Israel. There's a reason why. I mean, the forces within Israel that agree with J Street and Joe Biden, you basically have to say merits. I mean, you're talking about 5% of the Israeli population agrees with them.
But but the issue is that
they're totally out of touch.
I know, but you don't see the media in America, talking about what the truth is and what the real facts are. To them, J Street is the position. It's the only position. And to me, it's going to be like what you're saying. J Street was the cheerleader for Obama. I think that they're going to be the trendsetter for Biden.
I think that would probably be true. J Street has been very good. They're very good at getting their positions into the New York Times. I mean, they have a lot of influence there. They don't have that much influence on Capitol Hill, which was why they failed in their attempt to be the new AIPAC. The question is, where does the pro-Israel community go on that, if indeed it's a Biden administration at odds with the state of Israel, and would be at odds with anybody running the state of Israel, and not just Netanyahu, could be Gantz as well, and out of touch with the Israeli people, with the Israeli electorate. There's a lot of talk on the Jewish left about saving Israeli democracy, and it's all nonsense. It's really hypocritical, because their problem, with Israeli democracy is not that Israel is becoming less democratic. It's that they don't like the results of Israeli democracy.
And they're anti-democracy. That's the whole point, is that, they don't like the way the elections go, so therefore
They want to impose, American policies that would reverse the verdict of Israeli democracy. And
I just thought it was funny that, because we just briefly mentioned the New York Times, and I was bringing up on the screen the story that just came out this evening, where it says Biden calls out anti-Semitism on the left, but the New York Times puts anti-Semitism in scare quotes, like, oh well, of course it doesn't really exist on the left, but Biden has to mention it in order to keep the Jews in line.
well, I mean, I'll believe it when he calls out Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar. Just doing it in theory is fine. Call out the anti-Semites, and then we can talk.
That's true. Anyway, this has been really great. Thank you very much. I know there are lots of other things we could talk about, but I think we covered a bit, and maybe I'll have you back again, because this was a lot of fun.
Great being on.
So thank you very much for now. Thanks again to Jonathan S. Tobin. I have to put the S in because there are some famous Jonathan Tobins apparently without the S. But thank you very much for coming. For now, I am Elder of Zion, and thanks everybody for joining. Okay.